Hildryn Prime is right around the corner, or already released if you're watching this after March 15th. Acquiring normal Hildryn can be a bit of a pain for many players. For some it's the requirement to reach rank 5 with Solaris United, and for others it's due to accessing the boss fight. In any case, let's have a look at what this shield-powered Warframe can do. I'm the Engineer, let's solve the practical problem. If you want to farm Hildryn directly, you need to defeat the Exploiter Orb on the Orb Valis. To do that, you must acquire Diluted Thermia from the Thermia Fractures event, or bring along a friend who has grabbed some, and head to this cave here on the Orb Valis. Inside is the entrance to the boss fight, though this isn't a guide on how exactly to run that one. Hildryn's main blueprint is separately acquired from Little Duck once you have reached rank 2 with Vox Solaris, itself requiring rank 5 with Solaris United. However you acquire her, Hildryn, like most Warframes, comes with her passive ability and 4 active abilities. Her passive is an enhanced form of shield gating. When her shields deplete to 0, she becomes invulnerable for the next 3 seconds, rather than the normal 1.3 seconds most Warframes get. This invulnerability timer resets only once Hildryn has recovered to max shield by any means. On top of this, Hildryn's overshields are reinforced to prevent any damage bypassing them, such as toxin damage. This only applies to her overshields, so Hildryn is still very vulnerable to toxin attacks if she isn't above 100% shields at the time. Hildryn's active abilities are powered not by energy, as she has none, but instead entirely by her shields. Likewise, subsumed abilities on Hildryn will cost 10 times the normal energy cost, but as a shield cost instead. This comes with all the expected positives, such as not having to worry about energy drains for magnetic procs and disruption debuffs, energy max reductions in sorties, nor worrying about having enough energy at the start of missions or during them to keep going. On the flip side, using shields for abilities comes with all the downsides you might expect as well. Hildryn cannot cast abilities if she is out of shields and has no free cast perks active, despite this being her most vulnerable state. If you're in a no shield nightmare mission, Hildryn will be unable to cast through the whole mission, acting like a discount in Aros main. Effects which would restore energy have no effects on Hildryn, with the sole exception of energy orbs, which will instead grant Hildryn just 25 shields. To compensate for this shield cost, Hildryn has the highest base shield capacity of any Warframe. Now as for Hildryn's active abilities, they each fit a very different role. Hildryn's first ability is Balefire, activating her exalted weapon, the Balefire Charger. The Balefire Charger uses pistol mods, firing AoE projectiles that deal electric damage in a small area on impact. The area of effect has 0 fall off, dealing full damage to every enemy caught within the AoE, with no line of sight required. The attack also has an incredibly strong ragdoll effect on enemies vulnerable to crowd control, sending them flying even if they aren't killed. At base stats, this is comparable to the Kastanas, owing to a low critical chance and critical damage with innate electric damage type. Balefire fires much more slowly than the Kastanas, but deals much more damage to balance this out. Now you can charge up the attack to deal double damage, though this comes at the cost of 4.5 times as many shields consumed with every shot. Because of the imbalanced cost and time taken to charge, I'd usually advise against using the charge shot. Unlike normal secondary weapons, the Balefire Charger has no ammo pool, using Hildryn's shields instead, and it benefits from the casting stats on Hildryn. Hildryn's strength will enhance both the minimum and the maximum damage, Hildryn's range will enhance the radius of the explosion area, and Hildryn's efficiency will affect the cost of firing each shot. With suitable strength and range, you can get a lot more out of the Balefire than it may at first seem, which I'll cover more with the builds later in the video. If you need a little more from it, Balefire has an augment available from the Perrin sequence or Cephalon Suda called Balefire Surge. This allows you to use charge shots to generate shields from direct hits, as well as destroying nullifier bubbles. With good accuracy, this can allow indefinite use of Balefire without any other sources of shield recovery, though this does come at the cost of the mod slot. Next we have Pillage, Hildryn's second ability and the one she offers to the Helminth system. Pillage creates an aura around Hildryn, expanding from its initial cast range at 20 meters per second, cleansing her and her allies of negative status effects. While active, any enemies in line of sight and in range of the aura will have their defenses stripped. Of all defense reduction abilities, Pillage has the lowest base percentage per cast, taking away only 25% of current shields and maximum armor at 100% strength. In order to get a total strip in one cast, this would require 400% strength, which is a lot to demand. Fortunately, you can get away with multiple casts for removing armor, as well as stacking with the aura Corrosive Projection. Each Corrosive Projection in a squad reduces the strength required on Hildryn by 72%, down to just 112% for instant armor removal with a full squad running the aura. Strangely enough, Pillage does not alert enemies to having their armor removed, while shielded enemies will be alerted as it's treated as damage to the shields. When Pillage deactivates, either by timing out or by being recast, the stripped shields and armor are drawn into Hildryn, charging her shields to a maximum of her overshield capacity. Even in mid-level missions, this can be enough to max out Hildryn's shields in a single cast, acting as a huge part of her sustain. This sustain only works so long as there is something to drain, however. Once enemies have their armor and shields removed entirely, or if they never had any in the case the infested, Hildryn can no longer recover from those enemies. That's where the augment Blazing Pillage comes in. This works only on Hildryn, allowing her to recover shields and deal heat damage to enemies with Pillage if the enemy is also under the effect of Haven. Given the Force synergy, let's look at what Haven actually does. Haven is Hildryn's third ability, creating an indefinite aura around Hildryn and draining shields over time based on what is in the aura. Allies within Haven's range will be empowered, gaining a higher maximum shield, improved shield regeneration rate, and sharing in Hildryn's passive for a longer invulnerability period on being reduced to 0 shields. This aura also affects companions and defense objectives. If an ally goes out of range of Haven, or if Haven is deactivated, they will retain the enhanced shield hit points as overshields, again up to their overshield maximum. As for enemies in the aura's area, they are negatively affected, constantly struck by radiation damage with weak units also being staggered. This has a further drain on Hildryn's shields per affected enemy, so you do need to be careful managing your shields when you have Haven active. On lower level missions, this can serve as a way to outright kill enemies without having to use any weapons, while on higher level missions, it's almost entirely just for powering the Blazing Pillage augment, or otherwise a little bit of crowd control and ally support. Lastly then, Hildryn's fourth and ultimate ability is Aegis Storm. Hildryn channels her shields into allowing her to hover, reducing her overall speed and mobility to cosplay as a bladeless helicopter. While doing so, she creates a swirling aura which will lift up enemies in range, incapacitating them, and deal radiation damage. Periodically, the ability will also inject energy orbs from lifted enemies this way. While the ability is active, this ability locks you out of doing most useful things as Hildryn, including casting Pillage, which limits its overall effectiveness. As a support option, it does generate a significant number of energy orbs, but this will only support your team, as it will not generate enough orbs to continuously power Aegis Storm's shield drain. Fortunately for you, the helmet system exists, so this ability can be swapped out for anything else that takes your fancy instead, and I'll cover that in more detail with specific builds tailored around just that. Alternatively, if you really want to use Aegis Storm, you can still jump into operator mode to do more than ominously hover. So we've got an exalted weapon, a defense strip and sustain ability, a team support and synergy ability, and a hovercopter helmet slot. Let's have a look at some builds that'll work with this then. As ever, the first build is a go-to all-rounder. Hildryn, owing to the high demand for strength on Pillage, is not a cheap Warframe to get the most out of, as demonstrated here. This particular build uses 4 Former for 2 dash polarities and 2 V polarities added in. Thankfully, Hildryn does start with 2 D polarities, as well as a D polarity on the Excellence slot and a dash on the Aura slot, which goes very well with a couple defensive mods, Prime Sure-Footed, and the Corrosive Projection Aura. With this particular setup, you'll achieve a 98% armor strip in a single cast, which will make most Steel Path Grineer between 10 to 30 times easier to kill, depending on their armor. While this isn't a total defense strip, that actually serves to let you use damage type bonuses in your favour, such as radiation versus ally armor. Alternatively, a single extra cast, or an ally running a second Corrosive Projection Aura, will land that full 100% armor reduction. With the slightly enhanced duration and range on this build, Haven can be comfortably applied to both allies and enemies within 19.5 meters, while Pillage will cover up to 61 meters, and you can still make use of both Balefire and Aegis Storm as you see fit. Alternatively, swap out Aegis Storm for your choice of helmet ability, such as Ensnare or Roar. If you intend to take this build against the Infested, you should swap out either Prime Continuity or Umbral Intensify for the Augment Blazing Pillage to allow you to still recover shields against them. If you don't want to invest this much into Hildryn, skipping Prime Sure-Footed will allow you to skip the 2 dash polarity formers used on the Augur mods. If you also downgrade Prime Continuity and Umbral Intensify to their normal versions, this will save you another former through a V polarity, though this will reduce your casting effectiveness. Be aware that whilst this build has 2 Augur mods involved, they are only being used for the casting stats, as the Augur set effect does not work on Hildryn at all. As for arcanes, the brand new Arcane Steadfast can allow you to pull off free Caster Pillage or Subsumed abilities, which can help with your overall shield economy, especially if you take a sudden burst of damage or just lose track of your shield usage. Arcane Aegis, on the other hand, allows Hildryn to become an absolute bastion of defense, with constantly regenerating shields even under reasonably heavy fire. You can opt for the cheaper and weaker Arcane Barrier instead of Aegis if you're strapped for Platinum, but Aegis is simply supreme for shield generation to supplement Pillage. If you're comfortable dropping your overall tank down, you can switch to more aggressive arcanes, such as Avenger for increased critical chance, or Molt Augmented for additional strength throughout a mission. If you do choose the strength option, this can entirely replace Umbral Intensify in favour of your pick of range, duration, or an augment. In terms of helmet adjustments, you can focus on a little more range and go for Breach Surge. This will crowd control enemies through blindness, and the high strength on Hildryn will allow for incredible damage growth on the Breach Surge particles. Combine this with Haven and Pillage to both reduce enemy defenses and constantly apply damage, proving to be especially effective in high enemy density missions. Alternatively, you can go the support route with the helmet-specific ability Voracious Metastasis. This does very little for yourself, turning shields into healing on Hildryn, which she doesn't really need. However, it also turns the shields spent into energy for the whole squad. With this build, it'll grant 775 energy to every squad member in affinity range over the next 12.75 seconds. That's a rate of about 60 energy per second. By having an increased range, Hildryn can still apply Haven to her allies as well, which doubles down on the support, all with Pillage still being a strong defense reduction and self-sustain option. Ideally, when you're running support, your allies should bring at least one more Corrosive Projection Aura to reach total armor strip in a single cast. The extra range on both of these builds also supports the use of Balefire by boosting the AoE. However, you can dial this up to 11 with this fourth approach. By throwing away a lot of strength in favour of Overextended, we do lose a lot of defense stripping. For enemies with lower defenses, in squads with more Corrosive Projection, or if you simply double cast Pillage, this won't be an issue. This opens up a base radius on Balefire of 7.95 meters, which can be extended further by modding on the weapon itself. Combined with the strength, Balefire goes from being comparable to the Kastanas to instead being on par with the Icarius. Unlike the Icarius, we've got no ammo issues whatsoever, allowing us to paint the entire map with Balefire. In this particular setup, I've included Mirage's Eclipse to multiply the damage even higher. Now, in terms of modding the Balefire Charger, there are a few options you can choose from, where customizing to fight your enemy will absolutely give you the highest returns, or you can sit on an all-rounder approach as well. The all-rounder is this build here. Corrosive Heat is a tried and true setup for handling factions all round, working with the innate electric present on the Balefire while also getting full value out of Primed Heated Charge. Primed Fulmination extends the radius of Balefire by 44%, especially powerful given that Balefire has no damage fall off even at maximum range. Because Primed Fulmination applies multiplicatively with the range boost from Hildryn's own stats, Balefire reaches a radius of 11.5 meters. This is a higher range than can be achieved with the Kuvazar or Kuva Ogress. The downside to Balefire versus other secondary weapons is the lack of an arcane slot, but the low critical chance means we've got a spare mod slot for Hornet Strike to compensate for that lost potential in damage. Now, if you have a source of absolute critical chance however, such as through Arcane Avenger, Adaza Kavat, or a supporting Harrow ally, then it becomes worthwhile to swap in Prime Target Cracker over Scorch. The loss in elemental damage is made up for by the critical bonus, even when considering the option of having the crit chance without crit damage modding. The more external critical chance buffs you receive, the more effective this becomes. If instead you're running neither range nor critical bonuses, you may find it worthwhile to instead switch to a faction damage mod, such as Primed Expel Grineer, pushing the damage as far as it can go on a per enemy basis. While technically the strongest hits on paper, this loss of range does make this the weakest approach however if you're facing groups of enemies. Instead, this is more suited to dealing with individual heavier units like Xmas if you're struggling with them. In terms of overall power, Balefire doesn't keep up with the absolute strongest weapons in Warframe, but a practically unlimited ammo AoE exalted weapon isn't something to gloss over, especially with how strong defense reduction is in the current state of Warframe. Don't let the lack of crits fool you on this one, Balefire is still very powerful. Looking back at Hildryn, once you're into the late game, you can look into adding in Archon Shards to get even more out of these setups. Naturally, both health and armor shards are pretty much wasted on her, and you'll find yourself unable to give her energy based shards as she doesn't use energy. Instead, you can for example give her a single health regen shard to try to mitigate any toxin damage that might slip through to her health. Otherwise, focus on Crimson Shards for ability strength. With each shard, you can potentially downgrade or outright remove some of the strength modding on any of the earlier builds to accommodate additional range, duration or mobility options. Mix and match to your taste there. Finally with Hildryn, consider using her alongside a Sentinel or Moa companion with the Guardian mod equipped. When you run out of shields, this will instantly replenish your shields to 100%. Whether you're still getting used to Hildryn or taking her into high level missions, this can act as a huge safety net. The mod does have a cooldown of 30 seconds, so it won't make you immortal, but it can still be a saving grace definitely worth bringing. Overall, Hildryn is a strong Warframe. It's perhaps to her detriment that her most impactful ability is the one also available on the helmet system, but only Hildryn can get maximum value out of it at least. In any case, I hope this helps you decide how to set her up to be the ultimate shield-based warrior she's designed to be. That's all from me for now though, so as always, build shields, blast enemies, and fight well, Tenno.